And then there's Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in 2019.
And we're like, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. And your biggest issue is your biggest issue is how are we going to pay for it? And like, this is the war. This is our World War II.
Joining me to discuss this is Dr. Bonner R. Cohen. He's Senior Fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research, where he concentrates on energy, natural resources, and international relations. He also served as a Senior Policy Advisor with the Heartland Institute. Dr. Cohen, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it. We're all going to die.
We have been told for decades that we are in the midst of a climate crisis. Well, there is, in fact, a crisis. But the crisis is not the climate crisis. It's rather the measures, or to quote Al Gore from what you just said, the drastic measures that he wants to see taken to combat climate change and to combat the climate crisis. Larry, in truth, we're living in a time of relative climatological stability. We're actually living in an interglacial period, which means we're living between the last ice age and the next one. Contrary to what you are told in the media and in the classroom, online, and just about every place else, temperatures have in fact risen about 1.7 degrees Fahrenheit over the last 300 years. That was simply the Earth rebounding from the Little Ice Age, which ran from about 1400 to 1850. And it's worth noting that this very slight warming predates man-made emissions of greenhouse gases, which we are told over and over again are behind the whole thing. No, there is no climate crisis, but the crisis that we are facing is dealing with the measures being imposed on us by government, the Biden administration, many state governments, including where you are in California, I need not tell you that, as well as in Europe and elsewhere, measures that we are told with a straight face will actually keep the world from a climate catastrophe. But that catastrophe is nothing but pure fantasy. But it serves a useful purpose. It provides the pretext for power grab, because we're told the burning of fossil fuels is primarily behind this. If you get control of energy, you then control the people who need and use energy. And that is what this is really all about.
Well, Dr. Cohen, that was my next question. Talk to me about this worldwide hysteria. You see it in academia. You see it in media. You see it in Hollywood. You see it in big tech. How can so many people, otherwise commonsensical, intelligent people, embrace such a big fake narrative?
A lot of people like to feel good about themselves. They think, well, I'm doing something for the environment or I'm doing something for the climate. It's not that difficult, really, to stampede people, at least for a while, in a certain direction if you scare them enough. Then let's not forget a lot of people stand to benefit from this. And the people who stand to benefit from this are the people who, quite frankly, are already in power. Because climate/energy policy puts an enormous amount of policy in the hands of government. And governments love power. But it also puts an enormous amount of money, taxpayer money in many cases, into the pockets of purveyors of alternative so-called green energy or clean energy. And that energy, which, by the way, turns out not to be clean at all and also not reliable, but the companies who produce that line up for the government subsidies, gladly partake of the government mandates for this, that, and the other. And what we're ultimately seeing is we are creating, and you can see this in California, but you can see it elsewhere. You are seeing supply and demand get out of kilter. If you remove fossil fuels from the energy pool and replace them with wind turbines and solar panels, which are intermittent, unaffordable, and by the way, very dirty, because the ingredients that go into them, the raw materials, have to be mined. And this is a very ugly business. If you want to have millions and millions and millions of electric vehicles driving on our highways in the years to come, as we are told will happen, you've got to go out and you've got to mine this stuff. Bear in mind that the supply chain for electric vehicles, the batteries that run them, all the ingredients that go into them, for wind turbines and solar powers, that supply chain is controlled by the People's Republic of China. What we are actually doing in the name of saving the planet is empowering and enriching our biggest geostrategic rival, all in the name of combating a climate crisis, which is a piece of fiction. But you ask yourself again, to get back to your question, how have we allowed ourselves to get to the point where we actually believe this nonsense? It's indoctrination that has been going on for decades, K through 12, the universities, social media, and the Silicon Valley, which invest very heavily in all of this. It's a game that the rich are paying, but it's the people who are playing. But the people who will really pay for all of this are people of middle and lower income who are going to see their disposable income shrink as a result of higher energy prices imposed on them in the name of combating a climate crisis that does not exist.
Dr. Cohen, I want to talk a little bit more about that. The left, the cognoscenti, they pride themselves on caring about third world countries and poor people. And all of this forced moving away from fossil fuels is going to cause third world countries to suffer even more.
That's exactly right. This is a game that only the rich can play. And countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Indian subcontinent, and elsewhere, these people are in desperate need of energy. They need electricity for their homes. They need fuel so that they can get to their jobs. That is not going to be brought to them courtesy of a few wind turbines and solar panels. Furthermore, many of these countries are places where the minerals that go into batteries are mined. Central Africa comes to mind. The conditions there in those mines with child labor are absolutely deplorable. Anybody who buys an EV and can go out and virtue signal to his heart's content, well, ask yourself where the raw materials came from. How many children were involved in mining those raw materials? And if you get a kind of an eco-imperialism, which is very much being practiced by the United Nations, but also by the United States and the developing countries and other developed, already relatively rich countries, and you impose that on the poor countries of the world, you are denying them the things that we have taken for granted for decades.
Dr. Cohen, you mentioned that I am in California. You ain't got a room, I and me. I ran for governor in this state, and I was accused of being a climate change denier because I denied the climate change alarmism. But as you know, our governor has mandated by the year 2035, no more sale of brand new gasoline-powered cars. Your reaction?
The reaction is, if you're not going to sell gasoline-powered cars and you're going to switch to the politically very fashionable EVs, one of the consequences of that, and there will be many, but one of them is the enormous strain that is going to put on the electric grid. Why? Because the electric grid in this country is already a very shaky enterprise. We already have brownouts and blackouts. Just think of how many brownouts and blackouts we're going to have when you have, in addition to meeting the electricity needs of the country in the years to come, you add millions upon millions of EVs, because the electricity for EVs has to come from somewhere, and it's not going to come from wind turbines, and it's not going to come from solar panels. What we are setting ourselves
this is your time.
for,
keep us updated. Yeah, we'll keep everybody.
Is a case of supply and demand. There will not be nearly enough electricity in the grid to meet the growing demand brought on by what President Biden has referred to as the glorious transition to clean energy. That energy is not clean, nor is it reliable, nor is it affordable, nor is it going to be here in sufficient numbers and efficient amounts to be able to meet the country's energy need. And we're not talking about small things here. We're talking about heating homes in the winter, cooling them in the summer, providing electricity. This is serious business, but it's being addressed by people who are simply interested in increasing their own power and or their own wealth at the expense of the rest of us.
Finally, Dr. Cohen, let me suggest a couple more reasons why I think this mass hysteria has taken hold. I think that in our schools, K through 12, we don't have enough people who understand anything about math or about science. You look at our standards compared to the Asian and European counterparts, and we are often clueless, just like the average reporter has never fired a firearm and therefore ignorant about what a semi-automatic is versus an automatic. And the second thing is, when you look at the Twitter file dump, Dr. Cohen, you find out a lot of people just didn't know that there was an alternative point of view regarding the lockdowns, have no idea that there is a large number of intelligent people like yourself, like Dr. Richard Lindzen, formerly at MIT, who don't buy the climate change hysteria. They just don't know.
No, they don't. And sadly, this is bordering on a self-perpetuating system. You mentioned the teachers in classrooms who themselves were not properly taught. So just imagine what future teachers will be disseminating in terms of junk science, in terms of talking about things they know really nothing about. This is simply going to indoctrinate future generations in such a way that they don't question anything. And let's not forget, you have been called a climate denier. That is an attempt by the ruling. Never mind what I've been called. This is a family show, so we don't want to go there. But
well, Dr. Cohen, you've not been called the blackface of white supremacy.
No, not yet. No. But give it time. These people will lie about anything. Right. So, but the real tragedy of it is that now we are seeing dissenting opinions suppressed. We saw that during COVID, and those of us who have been dealing with the climate issue for the last several decades, well, we're not the least bit surprised that the same suppression of dissent that is prevalent in the whole climate debate went over into the COVID debate. If you oppose lockdowns, you are a COVID denier. If you question the efficacy of masks and getting booster after booster after booster after booster, and you still get COVID, then you were a COVID denier. What we sadly have now is this the open suppression of scientific dissent, the exchange of contrarian views in this country. This is very dangerous.
Last question, Doctor. Would you go so far as to say it is unethical to purchase and own an EV?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will give you a very simple answer. Yes, because you are complicit in the geopolitical consequences of what you're doing, strengthening the People's Republic of China. You are also complicit in the child labor that is used to mine many of the raw materials that go into the batteries and into the manufacture of these vehicles. And you are complicit and putting strains on America's electric grid, which it is not going to be able to withstand. So yes, it is a moral decision to buy an EV that in no way can be justified.
Dr. Bonner Cohen, Doctor, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.